The South African Police Service and the South African National Defence Force embark on the operation to recover suspected looted goods. There are growing concerns about the human rights violations of the suspected looters, with the calls now for a probe into the inhumane treatment of some looters in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Earlier on, I spoke to the Commission for Gender Equality Chairperson, Tamara Matabula, Acting Executive Director at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Anna Moya Kupeta, as well as criminologist with the University of Stellenbosch, Dr. Guy Lamb.
What we looked at was that before releasing the statement was based on the unrest that broke out, in two provinces. We know that, from the week of the 13th, this is where things started in the country. But basically, we've been following up quite a lot of media reports. We've been following up on what social media is saying. We've been listening to people. We've been having and receiving some of the complaints of people whose rights have been violated. And basically, I think specifically on this one, it was picked up in the social media that somewhere in the northern parts of Pretoria, in a particular mall, a lot of people's rights were violated on that particular day, with a lot of women, men who were caught looting, were subjected to some kind of inhumane way of punishing them for having been caught, red-handed with some of the goods that they took from the shops. And we looked at this, and we looked at how, we normally deal with certain crimes and the dealing of these certain crimes by certain sections of our communities is not right. It's actually violating people's rights, whose rights are actually protected in the Bill of Rights, which is Chapter 2 of the Constitution of South Africa. And we know that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is quite clear that all of us, we are supposed to be protected, and the Bill of Rights is actually clear that, you cannot, we need to promote, and you cannot disrespect anyone's rights, whether that person is a person who has committed a crime, or whether that person is even a prisoner. We know that even prisoners do have rights. Yeah. It's just that their rights are actually limited. So out of this excitement, we saw that people were punished in different ways that were quite inhumane.
Do you classify the kind of looting that we saw break out the last couple of days as criminal looting and as looting that undermines the rule of law? And certainly what we have seen, it certainly destroys the economy of the country. And therefore, what are the consequences in your view that should accompany that level of looting?
Yes, look, the economy of this country, due to the looting and the crimes that were committed, including not only just looting, but the burning down of the buildings and burning down of the shops, and certain basic things like, the clinics and all of those things. Those kind of crimes have actually brought the country's economy to its knees. And for me, and I think for any other person, no one actually condones, the fact that, those were serious crimes, and they needed some kind of serious intervention by the officials, of course, and government. But look, it doesn't actually mean that you need to dehumanize people. And in my view, I would say that people need to be given a punishment, and that punishment needs to be equal to the kind of crime that a person has actually perpetrated, and not to expose a person to such inhumane kind of taking the dignity away of a particular person, just because that person has been caught taking food or taking, a packet of biscuits from the shelves, and then that person will actually be made to frog march in front of the people naked and things like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's what happened.
Dr. Galamb, give me your analysis of looting laws in the country. Do we have such? Do they exist? And how are they actually implemented?
Well, I'm not a specialist on looting laws. Kind of the work that I've done has looked at why looting takes place. But essentially, I mean, looting is a type of theft. I mean, it's a kind of collective theft that's happening, but it's individuals who are participating in theft. So, of course, we have the Criminal Procedure Act. We have various other forms of legislation that relate to this. So this is, in terms of what looting is, it's ultimately theft or robbery. In this case of looting did take place where there were weapons involved. So, I mean, we do have the laws to deal with it. I think the kind of key question here is largely in relation to how the police have conducted themselves. So, and, what we've seen in some of the incidences in responding to the looting, but also after the looting, when police went to a number of people's, private property and, kind of raided the properties under suspicion that there were stolen goods or looted goods there, they behaved in particular ways. And I think a kind of point ready to make here is this is not the first time this has happened. Also during the looting, for example, the incidences of dehumanizing types of instructions and forcing people to do humiliating things. As we saw this last year during the enforcement of the lockdown level 5, level 4 regulations, where people were forced to do sort of physical types of exercises that were quite humiliating as well. We've seen this happen during sort of saturation, high-density operations. So there is a particular problem here with police culture, particularly when it comes to these kind of interventions. And we shouldn't be in a position where, police are actually contributing to violation of people's rights. We should be looking at ways in which the police are looking to kind of build legitimacy amongst populations. Yes. So let me not comment. So there's no specific looting laws to the best of my knowledge, but certainly we have sufficient legislation to deal with theft and robbery.
There are proud looters, or at least those who've declared themselves proud looters. Even in their acts, some have taken selfies, devouring cake. Others have posted all sorts of videos on social media about their loot. How should society respond to those who are declaring themselves proud looters?
Of course, this is a norm issue. I mean, what we saw certainly during the looting is sort of a temporary sort of change in norms where people normally wouldn't have engaged in looting, engaged in this sort of type of behavior, but so many people in specific areas did it, and it was seen as something to, sort of, it had sort of a status aspect to it, that you really want to sort of show and demonstrate what you've done as a way to kind of get some sort of notoriety maybe. But in these kind of circumstances, I think it's about, if we really want to try and as a society prevent these sort of things from happening, it's about sort of making statements that this is unacceptable and constantly demonstrating that, because I think that's where there was kind of a problem during the looting. There weren't any sort of countervailing forces in the areas where the looting happening just to say that this looting is unacceptable. We saw looting getting stopped in certain areas where residents and community members sort of stood up and protected shopping malls, and you had sort of community organizations out on the street and community leaderships really indicating that this is unacceptable, and they were able to kind of prevent looting from continuing. And I think it's quite important in the social media space for other voices to come through and condemn this and kind of really hold those individuals to account and almost shame them.
Anna, good evening. Good to have you with us as well. Did the looters display any form of human dignity in their actions, and how should society respond?
Good evening, Thabo. So the right to human dignity, as other speakers have said, Tamara, for instance, has said it. So when we saw people being frog-marched, for instance, when we saw people being humiliated in public, their right to human dignity in terms of Section 10 of the South African Constitution was violated. And for those who were killed, for instance, during the mayhem, the right to life was taken away. So for looters, for instance, those who were paraded on television, who were being shown, who were being shamed, so their right to dignity may have been violated in the process. But also, we, as you have said earlier, Thabo, we saw also some of the proud looters, so to speak, in courts coming out, showing some of the loot, or some of them really taking luxury